Well, I'm super excited to be kicking off this brand new series, Slaying Giants, and one of the most famous stories in all the Bible. I mean, whether you've never read the Bible before or this is your first time in church in a long, long time, I'm pretty sure you remember the story about, David and Goliath. David, this small little shepherd boy with his 5 little stones and a sling, and he fights the mighty Philistine warrior Goliath. I mean, it's just one of those stories. There's even a little song about David and Goliath, and around, and he threw a stone, and the giant came tumbling to the ground. I mean, it's that iconic story. And so in this series, we're going to be following along with David. Now, we'll eventually get to the story about David and Goliath. But here's the thing. I mean, for most of us, we will never have to go out to battle to physically fight a giant. But what we do face, all of us face, are giants in our lives. I mean, the giants that are lurking in the shadows, the giants that attack our thought life, our emotional epicenters, the giants that they have one goal for you and for me. And you see, these giants they're extremely gifted. I mean, they are talented. They have perfected their craft. These giants are intrusive. I mean, we don't invite them in. They just invite themselves. They grab a chair, and once they're in, they're never going to leave unless we do something about it. These giants are alluring. I mean, again, they're gifted. They've mastered their craft of whispering half-truths into our minds. And if we're not careful, we'll fall for it. They're convincing. But remember, no matter how alluring those half-truths are in our mind, never for once think that the giants are good. They're actually really nefarious. I mean, they're evil. They're wicked. And they're going to test you. They're going to try to find cracks within you. They're going to try to push you to the limit. And ultimately, they have one goal. It's to seek to destroy. So in this series, we're going to, together, learn how to, not only spot these giants that we face in our lives, but most importantly, how are we going to slay them? Now, today we'll look at, giant number 1. And the question is, are you going to be able to spot this giant? And I'm pretty sure. I mean, I know I've dealt with this giant in my life, and I'm pretty sure every one of you have faced and probably are dealing with this giant right now. Like I mentioned, we're going to be following along in the storyline of, this guy named David. And we first get introduced to David in a book of the Bible. It's actually 1 Samuel, but the book wasn't really written as 1 and 2 Samuel. It was actually just written as Samuel, but they couldn't fit it on one scroll, so they had to break it apart into 2 scrolls because it was so long, and scrolls could only be so big because they would have to carry them. So they broke it up into 2 scrolls, and now we get 1 and 2 Samuel. So we're going to be stepping into 1 Samuel, but both of these books, or 1 Samuel, is about 3 main characters. The first one is, Samuel. Samuel was a prophet. He was a spokesperson from God, and that was a really challenging position because God would tell his prophet, his spokesperson, what to say, what to do, and they would be obedient to God. And a lot of the times, the message that they were delivering to a person or to people was a difficult message to deliver. And so Samuel was a prophet, a spokesperson. The second main character is Saul, who was the first king of Israel, which leads to the third character, which is David, who was the second king of Israel. And where we first meet David is in 1 Samuel chapter 16. And this is what we're told. The Lord said to Samuel, remember Samuel was a prophet, and prophets, their job was to be the spokesperson for God, to say what God had them to say, to go where God told them to go. So God comes to Samuel and says, hey, This is what you need to know. How long will you mourn for Saul? Now, in chapter 15, God had rejected Saul as king. He said, you're no longer going to be king. Why? Because of Saul's lack of obedience. You see, God ultimately wants our obedience. He just does. He wants us to trust him and obey him. God deeply desires. He goes, I know what's best for you. I've created you. He's like, here's the path. Walk down this path. Obey my words. Obey my commands. Because I know what's best for you. And Saul refused to obey God. So God got just a little tired of his disobedience. And so chapter 15, he rejects Saul. And God just asks Samuel, hey, how long are you going to mourn for this guy? How long are you going to cry for this guy? How long? It was his decision. It was his choices. He did this. Samuel, not you, not me, not anyone else. It's on Saul's shoulder. How long? Well, Samuel looks at God, and God goes, this is what I want you to do, to fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I'm sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I've chosen one of his sons to be king. Hey, Samuel, I have something for you to do. Hey, Samuel, I'm moving forward. There is a mission. There is a purpose, and I need you. You're going to go anoint the new king of Israel. Samuel, again, God's spokesperson, says back to God, hey God, how can I go? If Saul hears about it, he will kill me. I mean, now Samuel is just fearing for his life. I mean, this is real fear. Why? Because Saul is still functioning as king. I mean, yeah, God has rejected him as king, but he's still in the position, which means he still leads the army, which means, oh, by the way, Samuel's like, hey, it's me versus Saul, me versus the army of Israel. There's just no way. Now, you have to grasp, Samuel wasn't some meek and mild individual. I mean, so many times we think about a prophet of God, a spokesperson of God, and we have this really soft-spoken, soft, pastoral individual. That's not Samuel. Again, go back to chapter 15. Samuel is a one that when King Saul brought King Agag, the king of the Amalekites, back, which was part of the disobedience, it was Samuel who took out his sword and killed King Agag. Samuel's not some quiet, soft-spoken, meek and mild individual at all. But Samuel's also, he kind of understands the situation. And he's like, man, if I go against King Saul, I'm dead. Because, Saul's a little crazy. And oh, by the way, he's in charge of the entire army. So Samuel looks at God. He's like, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? And God says, hey, here's the plan. Take a heifer with you and say, I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. God does something so intentional. He says, hey, Samuel, I'm going to be the one, Samuel, to choose a king. What you need to do is just have a sacrifice. I'm doing part B, you're doing part A. That's all that you need to own. That's all you need to tell people you're doing, because ultimately, Samuel, you have nothing to do with selecting the new king. God's like, I'm the one doing that. So you need to perform the sacrifice. That's what you need to do, and that's all you need to say. God goes on, and he goes, hey, part of the plan is invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicate. Again, he's letting Samuel off the hook. Samuel, you're not the one selecting the king. I am. So what did Samuel do? He obeyed. He did what the Lord said. Again, remember, I just hope you hold on to this. God ultimately wants our obedience, to trust in him and obey. That's what he's after. And Samuel obeys. Even in his mourning, even in his fear of King Saul, he obeys God. And we're told that when He arrived at Bethlehem. The elders of the town trembled when they met him. Why did they tremble? Well, for two very specific reasons. They trembled because they knew that Samuel was God's spokesperson. I mean, everyone knew that when Samuel showed up, he was going to speak for God. And, again, don't forget, just chapter 15, just days before this, it was Samuel who took out his sword and killed King Agag, the evil king of the Amalekites, right? So they're scared because, well, he's God's spokesperson, and Samuel's not some meek, mild individual. He's pretty fierce. And he shows up, and they tremble because they realize that something is happening. They ask, do you come in peace? And Samuel replies, he's like, yeah, I come in peace. I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. And the sacrifice is an act of worship God. And Samuel looks at all of them and says, consecrate yourselves, which simply means get yourself ready, get yourself presented in the right way, in the right heart, because we're going to worship God. He goes, consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me. Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. And when they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought. Now remember, he's there to connect with Jesse, who had sons, 8 sons specifically. Samuel knew that the new king of Israel was going to be selected by God, and he thought to himself, I wonder which one's going to be king. And when he looked at Eliab, he was thinking, that looks like a king. And here's the thing. We all know what a king looks like, don't we? Kings will talk like a king. They walk like a king. They act like a king. Kings are kingly. They're confident. They speak with authority. They walk in a room and they demand people's attention. Kings are commanding. When they speak, not only do they demand attention, there's some fear that comes with their voice. They're commanding. They lead the army. Kings were the first ones into battle. They were the first one to lead the army against the, evil oppressors. Commanding, and kings are charismatic. People are drawn to the king. Again, we get this thousands and thousands of years later. We get the image of a king. And Samuel's like, hey, it's time for a new king. And kings do what kings do. And so Samuel thinks to himself, oh, this guy looks like a king. Surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord. Why? Because Eliab looked like a king, talked like a king, acted, commanded, was charismatic, was confident like a king. And Samuel, again, God's spokesperson, was like, this is the king. And God says, do not. This is like the moment. God's like, I'm going to be so crystal clear in this moment. Do not. And you could tell Samuel just leaned in because he realized what he was thinking and what he was seeing. God wanted to course correct. God said, do not consider his appearance or his height. For I rejected Eliab as king. Hey Samuel, I know what's going on in your mind. Remember, giants lurk within our thoughts. Giants lurk within our emotions. And God's like, I know what's going on in your mind right now. I know what the giant's whispering to you, and it's alluring. I know what the giant is whispering to you, but it's nefarious. God says, the Lord, I do not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Did you spot the first giant? Again, it's kind of hard to miss, especially when God says, do not. He's like, hey, I'm going to point out the giant that's lurking in the shadows within your heart and mind, Samuel, and it's the same giant that lurks within all of us. What's that giant? It's comparison. I mean, the Israelites got themselves in this position in the first place with King Saul. Why? Because God said, I'm going to be your leader. I will be your guide. You just got to trust me and obey me. And the Israelites like, well, but God, we need a king. We need a king like every other country, every other nation around us. We need a king to lead us. And God's like, I want to lead you. They're like, but we need a leader down here. And they said, hey, God, we need a king to fight for us. And God's like, I'll fight for you. And like, but we need a king down here like the other kings that fight for their people. And we need a king that will give us confidence. And God's like, I'm God. And God finally just said, you get a king. And guess what the Israelites got? They got Saul. We're told in 1 Samuel chapter 9 that Saul was a whole foot, head and foot taller than any other person, right? He had the stature of a king. He looked like a king. He had the confidence of a king. He was commanding like a king. He had the charisma of a king. I mean, Saul was kingly on the outside, but his character, who he was on the inside, wasn't. You see, it's so easy for us to look, to compare ourselves with everyone else. Comparison always starts with our eyes, what we see. But what we see will always deceive. Always will. And that's why God's like, do not lens like everyone else is lensing what a king should be or should not be. Because like you got to look through a different set of lenses of who a person is on the inside. So then Jesse called Abinadab, another one of his sons, and had him pass in front of Samuel. And Samuel said, nope, the Lord hasn't chosen that one. And then Jesse had Shammah come pass by, and Samuel said, nope, this isn't the one either. And then Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. 7 of them, all of them, in front of Samuel. And Samuel's like, no, and God hasn't chosen any of them. So then Samuel asked Jesse, are these all the sons you have? A few moments ago, I said how many sons he had. 8. This is one of those moments that is so easy just to overlook and pass right through. But let's grasp the gravity of this moment. It was Samuel saying to Jesse, hey, Dad, you have 8 sons. Wink, wink, nod, nod, nudge, nudge. Like, hey, Dad, I know you have another son. Jesse was standing there acting like, oh, this is all my sons. Here's all 7 of them. They all look so kingly. And Samuel's like, Jesse, come on. I know you have another son. And this is why this moment. I think about David. I mean, he's going to find out this part of the story. This part of the story was not going to be hidden from David. And I just think about, and maybe this is something you've been dealing with. I think about the father wound that's created in this moment. For you, you might know exactly what I'm talking about. You know that deep father wound where you never measured up to your dad? Where you never saw approval come from your dad, where you could never be good enough for your dad. You tried and tried and tried, but you never did. Or maybe one of your siblings, like your dad always lifted up, always put the spotlight on one of your siblings, and you just could never here's what I know. For some of you, deep father wound. But if you are a dad right now, if you are a mom right now, I just want you to know what we do to parent our kids, to identify the giants in our life, will impact how our kids will spot and slay the giants in their lives. And I think this moment, Samuel's like, come on, Dad. You have another son. You have one more. And Jesse said, there is still the youngest. He's out tending sheep. And Samuel said, send for him. We'll not sit down until he arrives. So he sent for him and brought David in. He was glowing with health and had fine appearance and handsome features. He was a good looking young lad. Then God said, this is the one. Rise up. Anoint him as king. So Samuel took the horn of oil, anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. And Samuel left and went to Ramah. You see, we think about this first giant, the giant of comparison. I mean, we do this to other people. We lens this through our eyes. See, all of us, if we're not careful, if we don't spot this giant and work on slaying this giant, we all will pursue the land of Ur. What's the land of Ur, you ask? You know. You look around and you see people who are richer or taller or funnier or smarter or successfuler than you. That's the giant of comparison. We look around and we see that person with that new car and go, man, one day I will. We have a friend that moves into a new house and say, man, I wish I was richer than. Right? If you're shorter, you look at taller people and say, man, if only I was 4 or 5 inches taller. But if you're taller, some of you know who you are, like, man, I just wish I was a few inches shorter. If you're in school, you look at other people in your class or other people in the rankings, and you're like, I just wish I was smarter than. If you play sports, it happens all the time. And here's the thing, parents. Not only does that giant wreak havoc within us, if we're not careful, we unleash the giant of comparison into our kids. We do. The question you got to ask yourself, what are you chasing after? And there might be a couple there that you're chasing after. Do you recognize it? Do you recognize that giant is wreaking havoc within you? And again, it's the things we look at. I mean, that's why it's like I've been having so many conversations with people about the amount of time scrolling through social media and reels and TikToks and you name it. And you know what that's creating within us? Looking through this very warped viewpoint of other people's lives. And all of a sudden the giant starts whispering half-truths within us. You see, one of the ways we can spot that giant at work within us is when we push people down to position ourselves up. It's not the only. I'm just saying one of the biggest ways you will see this happen within us. And parents, we do this with our kids all the time. We push down to position up. This is the classic sports analogy, right? The referees are horrible. You shove them down to position up. The coach If our team had a good coach, you push down to position up. That player didn't really earn a spot. That player shouldn't be starting. We push down to position up. Parents, think about it. Think about it. Think about how we unleash our giant of comparison onto our kids. One of the things my wife and I have really tried intentionally with over the years. I mean, we're a huge fan of sports. I think it's a great space, for physical health. It's a great space to learn leadership and team dynamics, working with different people on the team. It's a great space. We're a huge fan of sports. But one of the things we've tried to do is keep this giant at bay. And so I haven't allowed our kids to complain about the refs. They know. I'll just say, the refs can't win or lose a game for you. They can make it difficult. Yes, they can make it difficult, but let's not spend time focused on how bad the refs are. What can you do? How can you grow? What are the things you need to work on? I always bring it back to them. One of the things I've always encouraged our girls is the captain's band really means very little, because leadership isn't about a position or a band. It's all about how you lift your teammates up. How are you going to position them up? You can do that with or without a captain's band. Hey, parents, man, I just hope that you spot the giant within you. Because if you don't, and if you don't work on slaying that giant, you will shove that giant of comparison into your kids' lives. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. That's why Jesse, ignoring his youngest son, man, you talk about a wound within David. So, one of the ways we spot this giant, are you pushing people down to position you up? Now, how do we slay him? Well, there's several ways we slay this giant of comparison. One way is we just need to celebrate, encourage, and speak life over people. I'm just telling you, that's just one of the ways, right? We position other people up, right? Instead of pushing them down, we hold them up. We celebrate their victories. We celebrate their promotions. We celebrate them buying a new car or a new house, right? Even though maybe within us we don't feel that celebratory, right? Like we're like, yeah, but we do anyway. We encourage people, even though maybe within we don't feel like wanting to encourage them. We speak life into them. Like when we see something awesome, we speak words of wisdom. We speak words of life into them, right? To position them up. And you might be thinking to yourself right now, well, Chris, so you want me to say something to celebrate or to encourage or speak life, even though I don't feel it inside? And I would say yes. And then your next thought might be, well, that's not authentic. Correct. But if you keep doing it, I'm telling you, when you lift other people up, it's going to slay the giant of comparison within you. And one day, that giant's going to be gone. And now you will mean it. I mean, think about that with exercise. How many times do you not want to exercise? But it's discipline. You just keep doing it. You keep doing it on the days you want to and the days you don't. That's what I'm talking about. The more you do it, the more you lift other people up and not push them down. All of a sudden one day, that giant is going to be gone. And now you're going to feel like you want to celebrate other people. Why? Because you're not comparing their successes, their wins with you. Years and years later, David had a son. Well, he had many sons, but one of his sons was a guy named Solomon. Solomon became king after David, wise, wealthy king, had everything, right? He was richer, he was wiser, he was better looking-er than everyone else, right? And he writes this book of wisdom. It's called Ecclesiastes. That word Ecclesiastes means pastor. It's kind of interesting because the whole collection of writings is truly about his mess in his life, his sin in his life, and what he learned from making a mess of his life and the wisdom that God spoke into him out of making a mess in his life. In Ecclesiastes chapter 4, this is what he writes. He goes, and I saw that all toil and achievement spring from one person's envy of another, one person's jealousy of another, one person's comparison, looking to your left and your right, going, well, they have and I don't, and they got and I didn't. Pushing other people down to position yourself up. That's envy. That's jealousy. And Solomon, who was richer and wiser and better lookinger, right? He's just writing, he's like, hey, I just want you to know what I've learned. Because this too is meaningless and chasing after the wind. It's worth nothing in life. And then he gives two very specific insights. He goes, fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. What he's saying is don't be lazy. That's what he's saying. He goes, fools just go, okay, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to try hard. I'm not going to work on my physical self. I'm not going to try to give my best at work to get promotions. I'm not going to study harder, right? Like, this is not the giant, right? We should give our best. We should care about our health. We should do our best with the one life that we have. This Psalm's like, I'm not talking about being lazy. It's like, give your best, which gets to the second insight. He goes, better, and then we'll get back to the blank. He goes, than two handfuls with toil and chasing after wood. What's better than two handfuls of toil? Two handfuls of I'm going to grab onto everything I can. I'm going to push people down to position myself up. I am going to be the richer, the wiser, the more successful person than everyone else. What's better? He says what's better is one handful with tranquility. That word tranquility simply means rest. It's like, yeah, with one hand, give your best. Absolutely. But the other hand, rest. Because the other hand, open-handed, is where peace comes from. Hey, God, I'm going to give the best because you have created me, and I'm going to do everything I can. But God, I'm not chasing after the land of Ur. I'm not looking to my left and right filled with envy and jealousy, shoving people down. Hey, God, I'm going to give my best with one hand. The other hand, I'm going to experience your peace, your rest, you. Do you spot the giant? Let's slay the giant together. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I just pray that we will spot and slay. That we'll see it within us. And Lord, I pray for every mom and every dad that we'll take this one so seriously so we don't shove our giant of comparison into our kids' lives. That we'll teach them how to give their best, but also celebrate, encourage, and speak life into those around them. In your name I pray. Amen.